So I'm at the Masters CrossFit Games right now. I kind of found a quiet spot in between events, and it's thunderstorming outside, so you might hear a crackle here and there. But I just kind of wanted to debrief my thoughts. And we're right now getting towards the end of Saturday, and the majority of the competition has taken place. The majority of the points are on the table, and just sort of overall noticing and how my experience was just overall, and like how I thought the testing body was, what the athlete experience was like, just sort of overall picture of getting to watch it here in person with Jim. So yeah, again, my experiences with Jim Royce, he's a 45 to 49 division athlete. So, other people in other divisions are going to have different experiences. And that's one of the things that I think is a key distinction here, is that male and female across all the divisions, there's a lot of spread in ability level. Like a 35 to 39-year-old athlete, the folks in that division are, like people like Will Morad are here who have qualified for the games many times. Like it's a very elite competition. And then in some of the higher divisions, there's a much more separation in the top of the field to the bottom of the field, especially with the ones where there's still 40 people qualifying through. So big picture takeaway, I think, is like you look at an event like this, and I would say firstly I'm struck with like how practical it was to separate the individuals from the masters. Having 80 people to run through, 40 males, 40 female for the games typically, is in and of itself a feat. And to do that with hundreds and hundreds of masters athletes as well, and all of their coaches, is just, you're not going to run a great event doing that. And maybe that's one of the things that I notice, is that when you see an event like this, there are things that logistically you just have to do a little bit differently because of the volume of athletes and people here. Like we had 800 people or so at the brief on Wednesday night, because you have close to 500 athletes are competing, and then they're assigning coaches. And I was joking with one of the other coaches in the back, like you see people who are just clearly like a spouse or a friend or someone who's in the back, and they didn't let the coaches go out into the actual warm-up area with the athletes. Like you're allowed in the back, but you weren't allowed to be at the equipment with your athlete. And that's not something they do for the individual athletes at the games. However, something that they have to do here, just because of the volume of people that are here, and then B, there's just less professionalism at this level. Like, these are people aren't getting paid for this. They're not professional athletes, right? So, and that's not to take away from what they're doing, because what they're doing is impressive in its own right. However, it's just very clearly different, and the demands of a facility, of an organization, like they have to have 3 floors and kind of running workouts all at the same time. And then they also added not only like the 460 or whatever athletes were here, but then they also added community divisions with teams. So there was a ridiculous number of athletes competing here. And I don't know if that's like they chose to add the community divisions and spread this out over 4 days because it's something where it just floats the bill and allows like more bodies to get here and pay for the venue and other things, and charge people a lot for you still qualified, but you still have to pay to register to go to the event. So I don't know if that's just a product of like, we're going to do this and have as many people compete as possible just to get more bodies in the door and paying the bills, or they're just trying to have as many people have exposures at this event as possible. And I don't know if that's really maybe in direct opposition to athlete experience, but I think it becomes more and more of a challenge to take care of the people well who you have here if you just continue to incorporate more and more people into it, especially people who are competing and out on the floor. So I guess I say all of that to get to my main point, which is there are certain things, because of the number of people, that you just can't do well from an athlete standpoint. For example, if you have to have 20 lanes of the floor, and you have it where it's sort of I called it like halfway basketball, right? Where you basically you have the rig and up to halfway through like the floor of the like staged event, then there's other people on the other side doing the mirrored thing that you're doing, which is actually kind of a cool setup. However, it is so condensed that it doesn't really allow people to progress down the floor like they normally would at like a stage competition, with lanes that are, again, long enough where you can kind of see the event play out how you'd like to see it. So again, one of the big cons, I think, to, again, the volume of athletes, and then what was kind of probably dictated them and set up for the actual staging of the floors, is that you miss the visual aspect of watching the athletes create separation in different ways. And I don't know if the programming was written in one way and then kind of thought about the layout of the floors and like kind of how athletes would go about it as like an afterthought. That's sort of how it feels to me, if I'm being honest. And I think if you're an in-person event where people are going to be watching and it's not like a qualifier, the goal is for you to have the event play out where the spectators can visually see it. Obviously it has to be a good test of fitness. However, a step beyond that, it's like it should be, very user friendly for people watching. Like it should be viewer friendly. So a lot of the events were not viewer friendly because they weren't advancing barbells, or it was very tight and you couldn't really see the separation, or like, even if you can't really advance much, there's ways that you can sort of illustrate, at least the end of the event, right? Like even if you ended on an echo bike, if you put them on one side of the floor and have the athletes run across all the entire other way, then you can at least see who's finishing first. Whereas, if you're in the middle of a set of 75 wall balls like they had in the one event to finish out, it makes it where you have no clue where anybody is, and then the vast majority of the field is getting capped on the workout. So you're just like, I'm blind. I have no idea as a coach, but also as a spectator, just like, okay, you can keep track of like your athlete, and then like maybe one or two other people have an idea of where they're at, and then the rest of the floor you're kind of blind as where they're at. You're relying on like MCs to figure out, but they're doing the exact same thing as you, right? There's no system for figuring out where people are at in the rounds. So I think that needs to be elevated in the thought process of the people organizing it, is like, how are these going to play out? How can this be as simple visually to watch and understand what's going on is physically possible to do while still being a legitimate test of fitness? Again, that sounds complicated. It's really not that hard. Like, okay, we had an event that was essentially a buy-in of 75 double unders, 20 chest to bar, and then you went to the echo bike and you had to go to 105 calories for the males, and it was an interval of 4 minutes, interval of 3 minutes, interval of 2 minutes with 1 minute rest to essentially reset the floor between. It's like you put the air bike, it needs to be at the beginning, because there's no way to see who's where when you're doing air bike calories. Like the judges weren't even like doing the gesture with the hand to show how many they were going by. It was just like literally you're blind as to where everybody at. They had little whiteboards that they write down in between the rounds, but they wouldn't even announce everybody. You couldn't see it based on where you're at the floor. Again, it was just a challenge to view. And that's, again, coming from someone who's watched a lot of CrossFit, thought about CrossFit a lot, and generally has a pretty good idea of like, where people are at in workouts. It was still kind of disorienting as to when you were watching it. So I think that's probably not great. And I guess I'll give them this, is that they changed the weights progressively, more incrementally throughout the age ranges than has been historically done at even online stages of competition, where it's very easy to change that stuff for CrossFit historically. So that being said, I think they did a good job. However, I think they missed the mark on certain things, and maybe they don't have athletes in each of these demographics or the age ranges and male and female testing them, or they just didn't really care to change the time caps, which maybe it was like practically, okay, we know this event is 12 minutes. It's going to be 12 minutes through 35 to 39 up to 65 plus or something along those lines. So we'll just tweak the movements to try to get them close. The reality is, in certain formats of workouts and certain, just rep ranges, like athletes are not going to get through that amount as the ages continue to climb. So what we were seeing, and even to 45 to 49, which is sort of like smack in the middle of a lot of these, the age groups, was that just a lot of athletes were not finishing workouts. And it's not fun as a spectator to sit there and watch, everybody except one or two people get time capped in a workout. Like, you want the cap there to prevent, two people continuing to work on the floor for extended periods of time while everyone else is like, they're watching them and like wants to move on, right? However, you don't want that to be the majority of people. You could probably make an argument that even half is maybe too many to get time capped. So I think, aggressive caps maybe have a place, even in-person competition, I would argue. Even maybe things that are time priority work might have an argument to have a place in-person competition, like AMRAPs versus for time workouts, for example. But to have that as the majority just seems wrong. Again, I think a lot of this right now is sounding very negative, but maybe that's just the things that I'm kind of pointing out. However, I will say you have all these people who are investing a lot of their free time into this as a hobby and investing a lot and having relatives and people come out and supporting them. And the fact that they were able to have this many people and to support them in a venue like this, and being conveniently close to the airport and a big convention center where the space is actually really good. There was probably limited options for it, especially on the turnaround that they gave, and especially the fact that this is year one. So although a lot of what I said was negative, I don't want it to come across that I am pessimistic about the whole thing. It's just like, naturally, like, I start to analyze what I would do maybe differently, or how, I've seen other competitions that I've been in person to or have coached at that I've kind of seen play out. And for all of those, I could do the same thing, whereas like typically I have a laundry list of things that I would change about the competition or the way that my, experience was as an athlete or a coach. So that's not to say that Legends hasn't checked a lot of the boxes off. More than anything, I think this is just an opportunity for me to self-reflect on things and to kind of synthesize my experience a little bit. I hope other people have gotten something out of it too. So I'm gonna head back to the warm-up area. Jim's probably gonna meet me down there soon, and we'll take on his next event. Yeah, there's definitely a lot of cool aspects to their programming, and I think a lot of people even mention that they like this program because it's a little bit more classic CrossFit relative to some of the games events, where it's like a little bit more. I wouldn't call this like phone booth fitness, but there is a lot of traditional CrossFit elements to it, which I think is, again, a distinct advantage to this type of programming. And obviously there's maybe limited options to use a venue or do outdoor events or other unique combinations of things, but the fact that they had a sandbag, dumbbells, plyo boxes, they had ropes and rings, and they're checking off a lot of the boxes. They had in-person like actually running on the ground versus a runner. A lot of positives in the aspects of movement selection, variance, varying patterns, tension types. So in that, I'll give them a nod of approval in that aspect at least. So I'd be curious of what other people think about the competition, what their experience was. So if you feel free to message me or comment below. So I hope you found something out of this useful.